I'm Avery Hayes, 34, senior financial analyst. My job title is precise. I analyze risk-manage assets and look for vulnerabilities in massive capital structure skills I never imagined I'd need to use against my own blood. My younger brother Blake wasn't satisfied bragging only to Mom. He decided to turn his impending win into a public social media spectacle. His Instagram post went instantly viral, featuring a ridiculously expensive bottle of champagne and a massive caption, "Mom will give me the entire trust fund. You get nothing." It was finished with a challenging wink emoji clearly aimed at me. The family trust, the Hayes Trust, was estimated to be worth $8 million, a figure large enough to command the attention of all our major external investors. Hundreds of congratulatory likes and comments poured in as relatives, friends, and even my old colleagues shared Blake's post, toasting his perceived victory. Blake was grinning ear to ear in the photo, his eyes challenging me directly through the lens. I didn't rush the moment. Instead, I smiled a calculated, cold smile and typed a single measured response in the comments section. Just one line, one frosty question, enough to bury the entire stack of pride he had just swallowed whole. Enjoy the last moments of your little fantasy. The atmosphere around the phone instantly froze. The smirk on Blake's face, even in the static photo, must have vanished when he read the comment. What? What did you say? His voice cracked, frantic and panicked when he finally called me. He continued to call and message nonstop, but I simply stared at the screen, my thumb hovering calmly over the block button. If family ever tried to use affection or obligation to fleece you for cash, smash that like button and subscribe right now. You won't believe how quickly this fantasy unravels. 18 months before the viral post, the foundation of this betrayal was laid. It happened in the glass-walled conference room on the 25th floor of the Hayes Trust building in downtown Seattle, afternoon sunlight pouring through the panoramic windows that framed the skyscrapers and the distant shimmer of Lake Union. My parents, Cecilia Hayes and Edmund Hayes, occupied the far side of the polished mahogany table, a hefty contract packet centered between us like an unexploded ordnance. "We require your personal guarantee, Avery," Cecilia explained with practiced, unnerving calm, nudging the top document my way. "It's an $8 million regulatory assurance required to finalize the new acquisitions in the real estate tech sector. Purely procedural, the underwriters insist on it for family-owned operations, even a trust of our size." Edmund leaned forward, his Mont Blanc pen already uncapped in hand, the gesture suggesting immediate compliance was expected. "As a senior financial analyst with your impeccable credit profile, your signature bolsters the trust's approval instantly." He pressed, his voice dropping to a persuasive, confidential register. "Without it, the final funding halts, our growth stalls, and Blake's inheritance timeline gets severely impacted." Their expressions mirrored the slickest boardroom pitches I had ever witnessed, confident, persuasive, and designed to make refusal feel like a personal attack on the family unit itself. I took the thick stack of papers and scanned the key clauses, escalating interest rates, sweeping collateralization that included every independent asset I owned, and the chilling phrase, "unlimited personal exposure." My pulse quickened as I realized the scope of what they were asking me to risk: my savings, my condo, everything I had built independently away from the trust's shadow, could be stripped away in a single market correction. Later that same night, back in my corner office at the fintech firm, my former assistant and current internal contact Sharon Vance entered with a slim, unmarked folder and a look of deep concern in her eyes. "I pulled this from the server archives, Avery," she whispered carefully, spreading printouts across my desk. "The vendor billing dates conflict fundamentally with the bid submissions. Emails reveal manipulated timestamps on the cost reports, and funds were funneled out through obscure subcontractors months before final permits were even filed." Sharon, who was the head internal auditor, had traced a complex web of wire transfers, millions dispersed long ago. we packaged the raw evidence and sent it immediately to my outside counsel. 48 hours later, the confirmation arrived. The fabricated invoices concealed a much darker reality. This isn't just about bad debt. Sharon stated, her voice tight as she pointed to one file header. The $8 million isn't for acquisitions. It's a desperate attempt to cover a catastrophic liability. There's an undisclosed sealed class action lawsuit against the trust's major tech, holding a potential loss far, far exceeding the $8 million. Sharon's gaze fixed on me, grave and unyielding. The loan was already hemorrhaging viability, and the trust was quietly insolvent. My personal guarantee was not a procedural formality. It was a strategically placed shield designed to absorb the inevitable shockwave when the truth of the sealed lawsuit finally broke. The morning after confirming the deep rot within the trust, I returned to that same conference room, placing the contract still unsigned back across the polished table. "I'm out," I declared, my voice measured and firm. "This isn't an investment. It's a collapse waiting to happen, and I refuse to personally guarantee $8 million of concealed liability." Edmund's face darkened instantly, his jaw setting tight as he pushed back from the table. "You don't love your brother," he shot back, his volume climbing sharply into accusation. "Blake's entire future, his inheritance, rides on the stability this guarantee provides. Deny this, and you ruin him. You always claimed you were the responsible one, Avery, the one with the financial acumen. Prove it now." Cecilia interjected, her tone dropping to a gentle but lethal manipulation. "Family shields family, Delaney. That's the rule we built this name on. You know how volatile Blake is. This stress could break him. We are asking you to fulfill your duty." Her use of duty and family felt like psychological warfare, yet endorsing their scheme meant shackling my independent future to their guaranteed financial crash. I chose honesty and self-preservation over complicity. Sliding the stacked documents back was one of the hardest acts of my life, carving a hollow ache behind my ribs, a dull guilt slicing deep for the sibling bond, however frayed, that still flickered. A couple of weeks later, during an exclusive family dinner that I politely declined, Blake swallowed their entire narrative whole. He later messaged me, emoji laden with triumph, detailing their private session shares are clean, no baggage. Mom gave me the transfer paperwork today. 35% in my name, zero complications. You missed out, Avery. He was routinely ignoring the operational digests and financial alerts I continued to circulate from my professional standpoint, deleting them unread. Charm and his inflated ego trumped spreadsheets every single time. The transfer paperwork pre-filled with his name was scrolled with his signature without hesitation, where mine had been fiercely demanded just weeks before. My heartbeat thundering, fully aware the public reckoning loomed. I selected the next phase of my counter-strategy, a calculated, controlled information leak. I discreetly reached out to an old acquaintance, a senior associate on the investment team of Leonard Stern, the angel investor, who held the largest single non-family stake in the Hayes Trust, a whopping $4 million. I didn't approach Leonard directly, which would have been seen as an act of open war. Instead, I anonymously forwarded the raw, unredacted legal documents detailing the severity of the sealed class action lawsuit. The email was terse due diligence review on Hayes Trust liability exposure. Urgency advised. The attached documents included Sharon Vance's initial audit findings and the projected catastrophic loss estimates. My goal was not to simply destroy the family. It was to ensure that when the crash came, it was triggered by a force outside my immediate control, the market's cold, swift self-correction. I maintained my composure in the following weeks, monitoring the financial news for any ripple effect. The evidence had been placed. The fuse was lit, and I stepped back to wait for the blast. The silence from Leonard Stern's office was unsettling, but I knew his due diligence team was now working overtime analyzing the data I had strategically released. My refusal to sign the guarantee, coupled with the delivery of the factual evidence, meant that when the trust dissolved, I would emerge financially clean, having successfully severed my future from their inevitable ruin. 3 weeks after my calculated leak to Leonard Stern's team, the glittering lights of Blake's celebratory penthouse party in Bellevue provided the perfect stage for his reckless vanity. He had rented the entire top floor, the expansive space packed with trust affiliates, high net worth investors, and assorted family members eager to toast his newfound fortune. Blake, dressed in a bespoke suit that cost more than my first car, gripped a microphone on a small podium set up near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Seattle. He was bloated with self-importance, rambling about his grand plans for the Hayes Trust's inevitable global expansion. I stood quiet, remote in my palm, my thumb hovering over the activation button, adopting an expression of placid contentment. Cecilia Hayes gave a tiny, triumphant nod from the head table, looking like she had already signed the final transfer papers for the entire $8 million in her head. Blake's grin stretched ear to ear, his eyes practically daring me to raise a glass to him. I didn't. Instead, I smiled sweet as the expensive single malt they were pouring, and then I spoke, my voice carrying clearly through the brief pause in his monologue. Blake, should I tell them what you've really inherited, or will you? The entire room froze instantly. Glasses stopped midair. Blake's smirk vanished entirely. Tell us what Avery... He snapped, his voice cracking with sudden raw fear. I clicked the button once. The massive flat-screen monitor behind him, initially intended for a celebratory slideshow, flashed alive with a blinding white light. One title, one number, and one complex legal term dominated the display. Sealed class action lawsuit, 15.5 million liability. The full, unredacted complaint filed 18 months prior dominated the display. Edmund's precise block letters authorizing a settlement negotiation anchored the bottom line. Cecilia's elegant, flowing script curving beside it like a false, venomous promise. A sharp, collective intake of breath swept the room. Heads snapped around, eyes wide, conversations dying mid-sentence. I clicked forward to the second slide. It was Sharon Vance's detailed internal memo, cumulative hidden losses, $12.2 million. A clean bar chart illustrated the catastrophic cash burn over the last year, proving the trust was operating on fumes and covering debt with debt. The figures stood undeniable, etched in cold, hard numbers. My Aunt Eleanor, a trust board member who had managed the portfolio's compliance for 2 decades, rose from her seat at the front table. Her chair pushed back with a deliberate scraping sound. I issued warnings back in October. She stated, her tone firm and unyielding. I presented Cecilia with detailed projections regarding the lawsuit's severity. She explicitly instructed me to suppress them until the new financing materialized. Eleanor's gaze fixed on Cecilia without wavering. The financing never came, and the liability tripled. Cheat! Blake charged down the aisle, elbowing past several distant cousins. He planted his hands on the podium, veins bulging in his neck. You fabricated all of this, Avery. This is digital forgery. His accusation rang out, but his voice was wavering uncontrollably at the edges. I maintained my composure and zoomed the legal document image until Cecilia's signature and Edmund's consumed the screen. Every loop and cross enlarged for clarity. Does that look familiar, Mother? I inquired, keeping my delivery measured and detached. Cecilia gripped the tablecloth, the fine fabric bunching under her fingers. Her eyes darted side to side, searching desperately for an escape route that didn't exist. She tried to speak, once her lips parting, then closing without a sound. Blake lunged for the HDMI cable and violently disconnected it. The display went dark, yet the data remained etched permanently in everyone's minds. Reconnect and prove it's phony, I challenged quietly. He hesitated, his fingers frozen midair. Aunt Eleanor stood resolute, her arms crossed in quiet authority, confirming the authenticity by her silence. Cecilia's gaze lifted, briefly met mine, a flash of pure, terrified hatred, then fell away again. No rebuttal emerged, no explanation was offered, only the crushing silence of absolute financial exposure. Toi jen sachnhan, tat kakat yeu kau kwa banjak biet, la viek dui tri tin hlien, mak yeu kau faim konglap, lai noi dung yeu kau naim su dung kau dandat ngan muot ma yeu kau kas va jambao jodai, se den tu spem, $20 chofan, pfang. Va nai la kau trau do, su sup jodai trien bao gomviek, na jau tu rut von bangai, buji ong Arthur kan tip, va jong bang he thong ngan hang. Jai la fan fanch qua kich ban moi juok viet, huan toan bang tieng an. Part 5. The System Collapse and the Emergency Guardianship. The shockwave from the exposed sealed documents quickly escalated into an uncontrollable market earthquake. Leonard Stern, the investor who held the $4 million stake, pushed back his chair from the high-top table and stood tall. "Consider my $4 million withdrawn at dawn," he stated flatly, his voice cutting through the rising tide of unrest. His ultimatum landed cold, his gaze sweeping the agitated faces of the trust affiliates for support. "Unless satisfactory legal answers arrive by the morning, I pull every associate and every penny of capital with me." Nods rippled instantly through the investor cluster, briefcases snapping open as documents were reviewed under the dimming ambient light. The atmosphere shifted drastically from forced festivity to undeniable crisis. Blake's knees nearly buckled. He was gripping the podium, his knuckles whitening against the polished mahogany, his chest rising and falling in rapid bursts as sweat traced lines down his temples under the warm, unforgiving spotlight. Before he could form another accusation, his girlfriend Vanessa Cole surged to her feet from the side table. Her crimson gown caught the light like a flare in the darkness. "I am not carrying $8 million in debt exposure for your family, Blake." She declared, her words sharp enough to cut the tense air. Her expensive high heels pounded the marble floor as she bolted for the exit, clutch bag clutched tight under one arm. Blake released his hold on the podium and lunged after her, his face contorted in raw, desperate humiliation. "Vanessa, stop. Let me explain." His plea cracked with terror, echoing off the vaulted ceiling as he shoved through the swinging doors, his frantic footsteps and begging voice dissolving into the hallway silence. It was at that exact moment that the true, irreversible blow landed. My grandfather, Arthur Hayes, 83. The man who had built the initial Hayes fortune from a single brilliant tech patent, rose unsteadily from his honored seat at the main table. Cane gripped firmly, he slammed it down once. The booming thud resonated across the penthouse like a judge's gavel. "Cecilia Hayes, you are killing my 50-year legacy." The accusation thundered, aimed squarely at my mother. Grandpa Arthur's eyes blazed with utter betrayal, his hand trembling on the cane head. Cecilia bowed her head immediately, strands of hair falling forward to shield her face, her body visibly shrinking under the verbal blow. Grandpa Arthur struck the floor with his cane again, a sharp crack, silencing all remaining chatter. He then raised his voice, addressing Leonard Stern's retreating figure and the surrounding investors. "Effective immediately and pursuant to the bylaws of the 1998 Charter Amendment, I am invoking the Emergency Guardianship Clause. All management authority is suspended." Simultaneously, the financial system Avery had anticipated began to react. Within mere minutes, an alert pinged on the front desk tablet in the building lobby. "Bank notified. Partial freeze incoming." The bank system updated instantly across all terminals of the Hayes Trust Network. 50% of all operating accounts were locked down, red warnings flashing urgently on every screen. POS machines at the Trust's various tech subsidiaries instantly halted mid-transaction, screens blinking, "declined" in bold crimson letters. A client attempting to process a late payment stared in disbelief as their card was rejected for the third consecutive time. The atmosphere thickened with unrest. Phones vibrated furiously on tabletops, ignored by board members now locked in hushed, intense debate over immediate damage control. Blake's discarded blazer slumped over the chairback, his silk tie dangling loose like a noose. The abandoned champagne flute beside it fizzed weakly, bubbles rising and popping in defeat. Grandpa Arthur lowered himself back into his chair, his breath labored but his resolve unbroken. Leonard Stern, gathering his leather portfolio, paused at the threshold, giving the final threat before stepping into the elevator. Cecilia remained bowed, her fingers interlaced so tightly her joints were pale, a statue of absolute crushing regret. 3 months after the penthouse scandal, the family conflict moved decisively from public humiliation to the cold, analytical battlefield of the courtroom. The immediate financial aftermath was devastating and highly technical. The trust's main operating accounts, frozen under Grandpa Arthur's emergency guardianship, remained inaccessible. All forward bookings and tech maintenance contracts were systematically canceled. Reservation lines for their subsidiary real estate platforms lit up within the hour of the freeze. Clients, corporate bookers, and development partners demanded refunds from the unfrozen sliver of remaining cash, creating a digital avalanche that crashed the online payment portal. Error messages replaced availability calendars. The most profound fallout, however, was internal. Cecilia Hayes filed for divorce from Edmund Hayes the exact same week the emergency financial motions were filed. The legal papers were served directly to Edmund's now empty executive office amid half-packed moving boxes and scattered meaningless memorabilia. The family court judge, focusing only on the assets not explicitly tied up in the trust's massive legal and debt liabilities, divided what little cash survived the systemic collapse. Cecilia received the heavily leveraged downtown condo with its ballooning monthly HOA fees and astronomical mortgage payments. Edmund was left with the classic Porsche that was now parked indefinitely under a protective tarp in a rented high-security storage unit, a useless asset given his sudden lack of liquid capital. No spousal support was awarded, and there were no lingering joint accounts left to divide the separation, absolute on official documents and devastating in everyday reality. Cecilia immediately vacated the property before the final signatures on the divorce papers were fully dried. Her personal items were boxed in hastily Sharpie-labeled cartons stacked by professional movers hired with her last remaining discretionary funds. The humiliation of being exposed as a manipulator who ultimately drove the family's wealth to zero proved to be the ultimate catalyst for her self-serving abandonment of Edmund. Meanwhile, Blake Hayes discovered the true meaning of his inheritance. The heavily touted 35% share allocation, the one he had celebrated so publicly, evaporated entirely during the forced sale of the trust's underlying assets to satisfy the largest creditors. The earlier assurances that the shares were clean were reduced to meaningless echoes in his cramped one-bedroom rental in Oakland, miles away from the opulence he was accustomed to. His once potent sales charisma was rendered utterly ineffective without the prestigious Hayes Trust brand to leverage. He drifted through a series of temporary positions, from a low-level sales associate at a minor tech firm to eventually barista shifts at local cafes, just to cover the basic rent and minimal utilities. His updated resume still listed hospitality executive in bold, delusional lettering, but the system had stripped him bare. The total trust fund, the $8 million he publicly gloated over, had been reduced to a gaping deficit of $3,200,000 after attorney fees, accumulated back taxes, and previously undisclosed legal liens were deducted. Blake was now personally named in several civil suits related to his signing of the false transfer papers, facing the very real prospect of personal bankruptcy. The consequence was raw, immediate, and painfully public. The sprawling enterprise that once dominated the Seattle tech real estate scene compressed into a series of archived legal folders, officially stamped "Resolved Total Loss." His outgoing communications to me dwindled to silence following his initial angry outbursts, the reality of his failure finally sinking in under the relentless weight of legal debt and zero prospects. The forced sale of the remaining Hayes Trust assets officially closed escrow 45 days later. The total proceeds after all legal fees and liabilities were settled by Grandpa Arthur's new oversight team were wired directly to a new holding account, the only account untouched by the old debts, thanks to my earlier refusal to sign the personal guarantee. I sold my final small percentage of the parent company's leftover stock quietly to a venture capital group for a modest but entirely clean payout. The check represented not wealth, but liberation. A weathered envelope arrived at my temporary mailing address the week I resigned from my old job. Arthur Hayes's unsteady cursive handwriting was scrolled across the front in faded blue ink. Inside lay a single handwritten page. Avery, your unwavering courage spared the core of this family's name from total disgrace and ruin. Insisting on the truth preserved what scant honor remains. Thank you for shouldering the heaviest load and for having the clear vision I lacked. Tucked within the fold, a single antique gold coin, the original investment Grandpa Arthur had used to start his first tech venture decades ago, served as a token of genuine gratitude and a final acknowledgement that I, not Blake, had acted with the integrity the Hayes name demanded. The outstanding deficit, that $3,200,000 liability, weighed on both Cecilia and Edmund like an unending, crushing second mortgage, built entirely on regret, poor judgment, and manipulative secrets. I transferred my life to San Francisco, accepting a senior financial analyst role at a high-growth fintech startup. I commuted daily over the Bay Bridge, the city skyline of steel and glass, gradually replacing the familiar Seattle skyline with its ghost of the Hayes Trust Building. Nights in my new studio apartment brought vivid internal tug-of-war's memories of holiday dinners around the long mahogany table, Mom's secret recipes for coq au vin, and the shared, whispered childhood secrets under blanket forts. Guilt often surfaced, asking if I had abandoned blood for principle. Yet every recalled deception, every forged document, and every hidden liability I uncovered hardened my resolve into unbreakable steel. Enabling their lies would have chained me to perpetual cleanup duty for the rest of my life. I chose severance, a clean, final break, choosing self-preservation over ceaseless midnight damage control calls. Blake's messages piled up unread in a relentless stack, the tenor shifting from begging to pure, vitriolic rage. You destroyed everything we had. Selfish traitor who never cared. Answer me, coward. The notifications stacked relentlessly, then muted entirely. I deleted the entire thread without opening the latest rant. His digital anger was an empty echo I refused to amplify or engage with. Family isn't a reason to swallow lies. Silence is complicity. Truth is freedom. My first paycheck from the fintech firm felt light and clean, earned, without family strings attached. When colleagues asked about my weekend plans, I spoke of hikes in Marin, not family gatherings in Seattle. Cecilia tried once more through a mutual cousin, leaving a voicemail pleading for coffee to talk like adults. I let it expire unheard. Blake surfaced on social media with filtered photos from dive bars, captions hinting darkly at betrayal by blood. His followers dwindled. Likes turned into pity emojis. I scrolled past, unfollowed, and moved on. Grandpa Arthur's antique gold coin remained on my desk, serving as a constant bookmark and a firm reminder. The lesson crystallized over late-night runs along the Embarcadero. Loyalty without honesty is shackles. The truth had cost me everything familiar, yet it gifted me the space and the clean air to finally breathe. The bridge lights twinkled ahead, guiding me forward, never back. Integrity is the highest currency.